But what I want to do this morning is talk a bit about business models. And what business models are, in the simplest fashion, is simply how firms make money. And you might say, well, that's simple. Firms sell something and they make money. Well, there are a lot of firms that sell things and don't make any money. 7 out of 10 new businesses fail because they never make money. Uber, WeWork, successful companies, they've never made a dime. They've never made any money. And that's a problem. But business models really involve 4 elements. First of all, a business model defines who you're going to serve, who your customer's going to be. And if you have an invention, if you have a business idea, you have a product, you still have to figure out who's going to buy the thing, who values it, who will actually reach in their wallet and pay money to you to obtain what you're trying to sell them. Not all customers value the same things. Some customers want a very inexpensive, functional product. Others want a more expensive product, a lot of bells and whistles. And those 2 customers and the products that serve those 2 groups of customers can exist in the market at the same time. So there's a market for a hotel like Courtyard by Marriott, which is really designed for the budget travel business customer. And the same chain, Marriott, also offers Ritz-Carlton. Ritz-Carlton is a very expensive, very high-end. By the way, the same customers may stay in both, just for different reasons. So if you're traveling on business and your company is paying, you may have to stay in the Courtyard. On the other hand, if you're on vacation, on a honeymoon with a spouse, you might want to stay in Ritz-Carlton. Treat yourself. So you have to figure out who are the customers that you're going to serve. And you've got some market research for your bike simulation, and then they give you a sense of who's out there in the bicycle market and what do they value. In fact, it turns out there are 5 segments, and we'll have to look at those and how those segments differ. Then you've got to have a way to make money. How are you going to get people to pay you? One of the things we learned in the early days of the internet is there's an infinite demand for things that are free. And there's still lots of stuff that's free on the internet. Publishers are having a lot of difficulty. They used to sell newspapers. People would actually buy newspapers. They put the content on the internet and people wanted it for free. In fact, they started out putting it for free and then people didn't want to change. So how are you going to make money? It's not simply a matter of what price will you put on the product. That's part of it, and we'll talk about pricing later in the course in more detail. But it's how are you going to price? The third thing you have to ask yourself is, how am I going to protect my profit stream? Assuming I ever get to profitability, I'd like to remain there for a while. Unless you're selling something one time and you're going to be out of business, then you have to figure out how you're going to get customers to keep coming back and paying you again and again. And so what are you going to do to sustain this? What are you going to do to protect yourself from competition? Somebody else comes in the market. It's a really good idea. Somebody else comes in the market. What are you going to do to protect yourself? And finally, there's a lot of activities that go into serving customers. You've got to identify all of those activities. And then you also have to identify how you're going to get them all done. And are you, your firm, going to do them all, or are you going to partner with others? For example, if you're in the shoe business, you could own the farm and the cows produce the hide that you will then turn into the leather at a tannery. You could also own manufacturing that turns the leather into shoes. By the way, you probably have to have somebody do the designing of the shoes for you as well. So you have to have somebody do that. You have to manufacture. Then you have to get the product to the customer. So how are you going to do that? So shipping involved. Who's going to sell it to the customer? You may need a distributor, a retailer. Those are all important activities because nobody can buy your product unless those things happen. Most firms are not good at everything. The skills necessary to raise cows are rather different from the skills necessary to do high fashion shoe design. And so firms will often specialize, and they'll say, we're going to specialize in doing just one thing or a few things, and then we're going to partner with others to get all the other activities done. I can't not do those activities, but I don't have to do them myself. So part of what we have to do is figure out how we're going to structure all of those activities. And that structure of activities we often refer to as the value chain. And we'll have a lot to say about the value chain as we proceed. In your bike simulation, you're going to be creating a value chain. You're going to be creating a distribution system. You're going to be creating manufacturing. Those are all activities that are necessary to deliver value to the customer. So let me explode those things out a little bit. First question is, which customers to serve? Which customers value what you have? Are they prepared to pay you enough to let you cover your costs and make a little bit of profit? By the way, for most businesses, profit is really what pays the owner. Most businesses are actually small businesses, so we often think about profits as these large amounts of money that are then paid back in part to shareholders, perhaps in the way of dividends. The reality is, for most small businesses, the profit is what the business owner lives on. So you're going to be able to generate enough money from the customers you choose to cover your costs, whatever they may be, and leave something left over for profit or to pay yourself. But it's not just a matter of what the customer will pay. There's also a question of what's it going to cost to serve a customer. Not all customers cost the same to serve. Some customers are really easy to serve. They know exactly what they want. They come in, they pull it off the shelf, they go to the cash register, and they're out. In fact, these days with self-service point-of-sale terminals, they don't even need to go to the cash register. They do it themselves. There are other customers who don't know what they want, don't really have much expertise, so they come in and they ask lots of questions, look around a lot, try things out, take something home that they pay for, try it out. Wasn't what they really wanted. They bring it back, they return it, they try something else out. By the way, all of those activities are generating costs. Somebody's having to deal with that customer. So you want to ask yourself, what customers value what you have, and how much is it going to cost me to serve those customers? If we put those two together, we have a market that we might be able to serve. Customers often are thought of as, in terms of economic worth. We think about the value that we build into products or services in the form of attributes or features. So we buy an automobile and we think about the value of that automobile as being related to things like its styling, its engine, its options package. And then we have to ask ourselves what people are prepared to pay for that. Here's an excerpt to give you some sense of, in an automobile context, of how people, real consumers, think about value. This is an in-depth interview, a one-on-one interview with somebody talking about the car. It gives you some insights into what they do or don't value. Well, there's no play in the steering wheel. When you turn, you turn. You can hold on to it steady on the road with one finger. As far as safety is concerned, in the rain, I guess, is what gets me. I don't drive that often in the snow, but in the rain, of course, I know it has a lot to do with your tires, but it's a heavy, a good heavy car to where, I have 2 kids in the car and I don't feel like I'm going to slide all over the road. What do you learn about this customer from that little paragraph? What do they value about a car? Safety. Okay. And why do they value safety? At least one reason. They've got children. Okay. So there's a whole story here around why people value, in this case, the handling of the car, the steering, the wheels, the weight of the car. And a lot of getting to know your customers is about having this kind of conversation. It's not simply, oh, I like the blue and I'll buy that. But why? What's the story that's there? Here's another transcript from somebody talking about their membership at a fitness club. I think we're getting our money's worth. If we're not using it, I wouldn't be very happy with spending the money that we're spending on the membership, but we're using it a lot. How do they assess value?
Frequency. Like frequency.
Yeah, frequency of use. I mean, it's something they're using often, so the membership fee is worthwhile. If they weren't using it very often, so in all likelihood, they wouldn't think it's very valuable. By the way, in that business, the biggest problem they have is that people buy memberships and don't use it, so they don't renew. So part of understanding value is having a conversation with the customer about the story behind their purchase. People buy things for a reason. Not always the same reason as other people, but they buy for a reason. You want to understand the reason. One of the things we often think about in marketing is how to put together the reasons people want to buy with the actual product characteristics. So we can think in terms of people want to accomplish something. They want to achieve something. Maybe they're hungry, just want something to eat. But typically, they're in some sort of situation or circumstance. So if somebody's hungry and wants to eat, and they happen to be driving about, they might go to a fast food restaurant. On the other hand, if they're taking somebody out on a date, if they really want to impress them, maybe they don't go to a fast food restaurant. So the use situation becomes really important. And in fact, people will buy very different products and services in different situations. And so it's not just a matter of who might buy, and what are they trying to achieve, but in what situation are they trying to achieve that. The same people who shop at Nordstrom's also shop at Walmart. They just shop for different products. They're looking for different things. What people are looking for, along with the use situation, sort of drives them to find a particular product or service that they think will give them the benefit they're looking for. And so they start looking at products and services with characteristics of those products and services. So they're looking for a fast food restaurant. Is it convenient to get into? Is it actually fast? Is the food of reasonable quality? Is it relatively inexpensive? I mean, those are characteristics that people would look at. Sometimes the usage situation dictates this. For example, they're driving down the road and they see a fast food restaurant and it's on the left-hand side of the road. Whether they go there or not will depend on how easy it is to make a left-hand turn. That may sound trivial, but McDonald's will not put a location anyplace where you cannot make a convenient left turn. That's a part of their location model. Because their view is that they're losing half of their potential traffic. They're just driving by because they can't turn. And then ultimately, products and services, characteristics, result in some benefit that they're seeking or not. And the individual makes a determination about whether the product was satisfactory. And so as we begin to do our product planning or our service planning, we need to think about what are the goals people are trying to achieve, in what situations, what characteristics of a product or service would deliver the benefit or goals, and then how's the individual going to evaluate that after the fact. Here's an example of what we call a customer hierarchy, the sort of relationship between benefits and characteristics of products for a physical fitness center. Desired end states, the goals, general feeling of healthiness, sense of accomplishment, benefits that they might get in use, that they're looking for, things like maybe consistency in use, convenience, not bored with the routine, versatility, ability to concentrate on the workout, freedom from health worries, and then how does that all translate into characteristics of the health club? So convenience has a lot to do with location, hours available, not bored with the routine, just have enough machines, enough different activities, ability to concentrate, you have friendly desk personnel who get you in and out, as opposed to giving you a tough time while you're there. Freedom from health worries, maybe there's a swimming pool, you can be sure that the pool is clean. So there's attributes, while they are important, they're important because they represent something that the individual is trying to achieve or attain. So, you all have cell phones, right? I see. What are some of the features of your cell phone? You can call and text people. Okay. Why would you want to do that?
Get in contact.
To get in contact. Why would you want to do that?
Because you want to find out information.
You may want to find out information.
Say hello.
Say hello. Is there anything about relationships in there?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's one way to think about a cell phone is it's a relationship facilitator. Right? There was a hand back in the back here.
I was going to say social media.
Social media. Okay. Why? Yeah.
Cameras.
The camera. Okay. 20 years ago, nobody ever thought about a camera on a phone. They thought it was a silly idea. In fact, I said in a meeting, if you look back at when they decided it was a silly idea. Why camera on a phone? Yeah.
Capture day-to-day moments.
You can capture day-to-day moments. Why would you want to do that?
Just memories, and also to share it with other people, still relationships, social media.
Memory and sharing. And why would you want to do that?
Stay connected.
Stay connected. Back to relationships. Good. Good.
Oh, just going back to the camera thing, because so it's more convenient to have one thing, so you don't have to have a camera and a phone.
Yeah, if you want to take pictures and you're going to be carrying your phone around anyway, it's just more convenient to have the camera there. Other features of your cell phone. Yeah.
Flashlight.
Flashlight. Okay. I actually find that to be a very useful feature. But why a flashlight?
Why?
Yeah.
So you can find things easily in the dark.
Okay. You find yourself in the dark often?
At night, yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
So like maps, directions.
Yeah, I can get maps and directions. Yeah. And you know, again, I could ask you why. I could ask you what maps are most important to you. Yeah.
You can have like a whole wallet on your phone now.
Yeah, you can pay for things now. Yeah. It's a substitute for credit cards. So it's a convenience of being able to pay.
Didn't they just release like an Apple credit card also?
Apple has just released a credit card, yes. And yes, there is an actual physical credit card, but it also resides on your phone. Yeah. So you don't actually have to carry the card around. If you noticed in this exercise, I asked why several times. And the reason for that is there's always another underlying reason. And you really want to try to understand that. There's a market research technique in product design that's sometimes called the 5 whys. You ask somebody what's important and why. Well, why is that important? And ultimately we build this hierarchy of characteristics that enable us to really understand the story behind why the customer's buying this product. Ultimately, what we need to create as a first cut at delivering a product or service is a simple statement of what benefit we're going to provide. And we refer to that in marketing as a value proposition. It's simply a statement of the benefits, or if you will, the value offered to the customer in the customer's language. I work with a lot of engineers and technical people, and they often talk about their products in technical language, which very few people understand. What people want to know is, what does it do? How does it work? Good value propositions communicate value simply, directly. Good value propositions are also easy to remember. Oops. And a really good value proposition indicates how the product or service is different from competitors. A way to reduce risk in product and service design and to reduce costs is to create the value proposition first. Try it out, test it. Then go see if you can build a product that in fact will deliver that value. When Nestle brought out their diet shake a few years ago, they created the advertising for the shakes first. And they went out and they tested it. By the way, they were all chocolate flavored. You can imagine how consumers reacted to chocolate flavored diet shake. Pretty positive. So they got a positive reaction to the advertising or print ads. And they took that back to their R&D people and said, can you make this? In a lot of organizations, what happens is firms spend a lot of time and a lot of money building a product before they ever ask a customer, would you want one of these? That's a really expensive, really risky way to design a product. Create a value proposition, go out and test it, see if anybody cares. Here's some really good examples of value propositions. BMW is the ultimate driving machine. What does that tell you?
Best car.
Hmm?
The best car.
By the way, if you're not the ultimate driving machine, what are you? It tells you something about the competitors, too. The Dollar Shave Club. A great shave for a few bucks a month. Really simple. That's exactly what they deliver. Intuit. Make the quick input books. Simplify the business of life. Simple. Lyft. A ride in minutes. Really straightforward. Netflix. Watch anywhere, cancel anytime. Ritz-Carlton. Ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. By the way, that says something about the employees as well as about the customers. Target. Expect more, pay less. Zillow. You're all familiar with Zillow? Find your way home. Very simple, very straightforward. By the way, the marketing creatives have played with these things, most of them, to make them a little snappier, a little more memorable. But basically the concept is, what is the statement of the value you're delivering? Value implies payment. What's it worth? What are you going to pay? I hear people talk all the time about something that's valuable, right up to the point where you say, and how much are you going to pay for that? Oh, I didn't want to pay anything. So that means that the second element of a business model is figuring out how to get people to pay you, and we refer to that as revenue generation. How are you going to generate revenue? How are you going to make money? As I said earlier, it's not just the price. What are customers willing to pay for? How are you going to let them pay? If you buy software, you can just buy the software package itself, download it, CD-ROM. That's one way to pay for it. Another way to pay for it is a subscription. You buy a year's worth of use. It's available to you for a year, in the year, unless you renew your subscription, it's gone. In contrast, if you buy the software, you've got it forever. Of course, you may have to buy upgrades, and so one advantage of a subscription is that you might get upgrades automatically, whereas if you bought it outright, you might have to pay for the upgrades as they come out. There are a few different ways to price, and some people will prefer one versus the other, which is actually why a lot of software firms will give you the option. Pay this way, or you can pay that way. So by the way, you have to pay. When Xerox first came out with its copying machines, they were huge devices that cost millions of dollars. There weren't a lot of firms that could afford $1 million plus piece of machinery. And they brought the products out in the late 50s, and even big companies, that was a big expense. So there's natural resistance to people just buying these machines outright. So they came up with a different pricing strategy. You can lease the machine. You'll come deliver it, put it in your office, and you can pay us a monthly fee. Oh, and every time a copy is made, there's a little clicker that counts the copies. And so there's a click charge based on the number of copies. That was their pricing model. And it overcame the resistance of firms to the really big price. And that's the way Xerox and most other copying companies to this day still price their product. It's a monthly lease and a click charge. How does Hewlett-Packard make its money? I'll be more specific. It has printers. How does it make its money on printers? Ink. Yeah. They don't lease the printers. In fact, they sell the printers for next to nothing. But then they charge you a lot for the ink. By the way, what you're getting from Xerox and what you're getting from Hewlett Packard as an outcome is exactly the same. It's ink on a page. Xerox, though, charges you a lease plus a click charge. Hewlett Packard charges you for those ink cartridges. Two different ways to charge for the same outcome. But they have really important other characteristics. What is ink for Xerox? It's a cost. Ink is a cost. They're not charging you for the ink. So, if they can get you to put as little ink as possible on the page to get what you want, and still pay the click charge, that's to their advantage. What is ink to Hewlett Packard? It's revenue. It's their business. I mean, their killer application would be one where you have to use the entire ink cartridge for one page. Because you're paying actually for the ink. Here's another implication. Which firm, Xerox or Hewlett Packard, would be more interested in digital photography? HP. Why?
Because you need more ink to print like color.
Yeah. If you're printing photographs, you're going to use a lot more ink, and you're probably going to want color ink. And so HP would have much greater interest in cooperating around the development of digital photography and digital cameras, not so much Xerox. This notion of what you're delivering and how people are paying for it can have really profound implications for the business. Have any of you heard of a facility called the Palo Alto Research Center Park? Belongs to Xerox. The Palo Alto Research Center developed the graphical user interface that we all now are familiar with on our computers. They developed the mouse. They actually developed Ethernet and a whole range of other things. They never made any money on all those things because they couldn't figure out how to put them into their copiers. They had a particular business model and the way they were going to charge and all this other great stuff. They couldn't figure out how to get it in and make money. So the way to say that is they couldn't figure out a business model that would make use of all that great technology. By the way, they actually were very open and had tours because they were very proud of their research facility. And it turns out that one of the people who came by on a tour one day was a guy by the name of Steve Jobs. And guess where he got the idea of a graphical user interface and a mouse? He saw them all at Park. By the way, if you're really interested, there's a great book on the history of Xerox in Park that talks about all the issues that they had. But revenue generation and the model for revenue generation can really have implications far beyond simply what are people going to pay me. It really gets to the heart of what are people paying for, how are they paying for it, my ability to extend the product in particular ways. Third element of a business model. Unless I'm trying to do a one-time hit, make a lot of money once and be done. I've got to figure out a way to make it keep going. And it's got to keep going in the face of competitors. Because if I actually come up with a really good idea, people are going to see it. They're going to say, well, I could do that too. Like, I could probably do it too cheaper. Or maybe not as well, but close enough and cheaper. So here we get into the issue of sustainability. I mean, even if you're selling novelty products, novelty products are things people buy often one time because they're just kind of cute. Chia pets. Most people don't buy lots of chia pets. They buy it once, usually as a gift for somebody. It's a gag. But even if you're in that type of business, you need to be constant. If you're going to stay in business, you need to be constantly coming up with the next really interesting novel product that people will buy because it's curious. There are lots of different ways to sustain a business. You'll hear about these in strategy classes very often. You'll hear about barriers to competitive entry. There really aren't many real barriers to competitive entry. If somebody decides they want to be in your business and they have enough money, they can be in your business. But you can make it expensive. And so one barrier could be your cost structure. You could just be so good at what you do and so efficient at what you do that it's really hard for anybody to compete with you at the same price. Walmart's a really good example. Nobody can really compete with Walmart on price. It's not bricks and mortar. So, low costs, which you pass on to the customer, can be one barrier to entry. There's just one problem with that. There can only be one low-cost provider in any market. The good news is there's always a segment of the market that's interested in low price. And so if you've got low costs, you can serve that market. But if you're not the low-cost provider, now you have to think about other ways that you can differentiate yourself, other ways that you encourage people to buy, other than just on price. And there are lots of other reasons people buy. For a lot of products, price isn't terribly important at all. Another barrier involves barriers to switching. Once you become a customer, you just decide it's inconvenient to switch. So how many of you use Quicken? Any of you? No? Okay. Finances probably aren't complicated enough yet to need software management. But once people have taken the time to put all of their financial records into a piece of software like Quicken, they don't want to switch. Because then they have to put all that up. They have to do it all again. So there's a barrier to switching. So you want to think a little bit about how inconvenient would it be for people to leave you. By the way, in those cases, if people do leave you, they're really unhappy. Because they're actually having to work to leave you. There's all kinds of intellectual property, things that you have that's unique. In fact, you may have things that are unique that are not even necessarily protected as intellectual property. When I talk about intellectual property, I'm talking about things like brands, copyrights, patents, which you own and nobody else can legally use. So it's a source of protection. But you might have access to a unique resource. You just have to be located conveniently near that resource. There's a company that I did a lot of work with when I was on the faculty at Vanderbilt called Hickory Specialties Company. Hickory Specialties Company sells smoke. Literally sell smoke in a bottle. You can go to the retail store and buy Wright's liquid smoke. By the way, it's good stuff. You can use it in place of barbecue. Every hickory flavored product in the country actually is flavored with this stuff. And all they do is they burn hickory wood, capture the smoke in a solution, and then sell it. They are successful in part because they're located in Tennessee, where there's a big hickory forests. So they have kind of a unique access to that type of wood. It turns out hickory is a preferred wood in terms of taste. So you might have access to unique resources. Corporate culture, just how you do things, how the organization works. Peter Drucker was once quoted as saying that culture eats strategy for lunch. That if you embed the way you do things in an organization, it's really hard for other organizations to copy it. Walmart is another good example. People who work at Walmart get up every morning thinking about how they're going to take cost out of their activities. It's just a part of the culture. Same is true at the other end with Ritz-Carlton. People get up every morning thinking about how we're going to deliver value to our customers. In fact, the employees have meetings, the whole employee staff, gardeners, housekeeping, front desk, have a meeting every morning at the hotel to talk about their guests and the experience their guests are having. Brands, I'm going to have a lot to say about brands in the class. Brands are a very powerful way of sustaining a business, because once people start buying on the basis of brand, it's hard to get them to stop buying on the basis of brand. They just walk in and say, give me a Coca-Cola. Much to the frustration of Pepsi. And customer loyalty. Brands are about customer loyalty too, but in a lot of businesses, it really is about loyalty of the customer to the organization, its people, its products, and services. The people keep coming back. So I need to think about, of all of those things, what am I going to focus on as a way of sustaining my business model? If I'm not a low-cost producer, maybe I can build a brand that people will value and pay more for, so I can cover my costs. Okay, well, if I'm going to do that, then what should the character of that brand be? And how are we going to maintain it over time? Fourth element of the business model. How do we organize? Yeah.
Can you launch a brand, or is the brand more of an outcome of like consistency of a product? Like, for example, with Apple, we think of Apple as a brand, but when they launched, were they truly a brand, or were they just a product?
Steve Jobs had a very clear notion of what he wanted to put in the market. And it wasn't just about the product. In fact, he designed the product specifically with the idea of what he wanted people to experience. In fact, you get to find this on YouTube, some of his early discussions of Apple. And one of the insights he had was we were beginning to create enormous amounts of computer power, and people thought about it in traditional terms like we do more computations, bigger problems. And part of Job's insight was we could take some of that power and use it to change the user experience. So we could create a graphical user interface. We can create a mouse. And he was all about the user experience. And to this day, that is still what the Apple brand is all about. It's about your user experience. You find that in the phone, you find it in your computers, you find it in your watch. They're trying to give you a unique experience. In fact, there are folks who would tell you that Apple is actually a luxury brand. And if you look at their margins are about the same as a Ferrari's margins. They really are a luxury brand. They get big margins on those things, but most people are willing to pay for that experience. And that's what the brand is about. But they spent years creating that brand. Same as the more mundane product, Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is sugar and water, carbonated water, but it's still that. But they spent years and years building that brand, and it's become iconic. I mean, Santa Claus is famous because Coca-Cola used it as advertising. Santa was around, but Coca-Cola really made Santa popular, and so they built a brand, and I'll show you some of the associations with Coca-Cola a bit later in the class. But part of what you want to think about is not merely what's the physical product or what's the service, but what's going to be the user experience. Because that's what the brand is about. Product designers, people who work in industrial design, actually say that there are three things you need to pay attention to when designing a product. One is functionality. What is it supposed to do? Does it work? Does it do what it's supposed to do? So there's a functional element. But that's probably the least important. I mean, obviously, if the product doesn't work, nobody's going to buy it. But assuming you've got it to work, the other two elements are more important. The second element is a cognitive element, a thinking element. Does it work the way you want it to work? How should it work? When printers, personal printers, first came onto the market, people would use the printers, and then you'd see them standing beside the printers with the pages doing this. Why were they doing that? Because the default for the order in which the pages came out was not front to back, but back to front. That's not the way things are supposed to come out. Now that was an easy fix. Simple change the default in the order. But people kind of want to see the front page first and the back page last. If it doesn't work that way, there's something wrong. Where do people want the on-off buttons? Where do people, expect to find a product in the store? When Pringles was introduced, they had a great deal of a lot of problems because Pringles in the tinfoil can didn't lend itself to being on the potato chip rack. People didn't know where to go find it, so they actually had to re-educate consumers. So this just worked the way you expect it to work. And the third element is how do people feel when they're using the product or service? Do they feel smart, empowered, special? Or do they feel really dumb? Can't make it work? Some of you may have had the experience of calling a help desk, and they have given you exactly the right answer to fix your problem. But when you hang up, you feel really dumb. That's probably not good service. You want to feel good about that experience. So when we talk about a brand, we're talking about all of those kinds of things. Some of them are part of a tangible product, and they may be manifest in features and characteristics and attributes. But a lot of these are just kind of intangible. They're the way we think about and feel about the product. People get very attached to brands. I've talked to people about products like personal hygiene products, toothpaste, shaving, lather, mascara, makeup, whatever. And you'll hear people talk about, if I don't use it, I don't feel right all day. That's a powerful statement about a product. I didn't use the product this morning. It ruined my whole day. I want all my customers to feel that way about my product. And so the issue with that, we want to think about how you create that. Now, you can't always do that in a costly way. Walmart does engage in a lot of personal service. However, when you walk in the door, there is somebody that says hello. What does it cost? Not much. But they greeted you. You're a human being. You're a person. We're glad you're here. Again, part of the brand experience. I'm going to have a lot more to say about brands as we go through the class, because I believe brands are really, really powerful and a real source of sustainable advantage over a long time. Fourth element of business model: how do we organize all the activities? Well, the first thing we have to do is figure out what the activities are. What do we need? What do we need in order to serve the customer? So this may be products. Okay, what kind of product do we need? It may be services. Okay, what kind of services? It may be people. What kind of people do we need? What do they need to be able to do? There may be suppliers. If I'm a manufacturer, I've got to get my raw materials and component parts from somewhere. So that becomes a part of the activities that are necessary. And I either build them myself or I get it from somebody else. I may need distribution partners. Who's going to sell the product? Well, I might have a sales force. That's one way to do it. Sales forces are really expensive. If I'm selling jet aircraft from Boeing, probably makes a lot of sense to have a sales force. Because you just have to make one sale, and there's a lot of margin there. On the other hand, if I'm selling chocolate candy bars, do I really want a sales force to do that? Does it make any sense? I'd much rather put it where there are a lot of other food products and people who specialize, institutions that specialize in selling all of those products. And that becomes my distribution partner. So in thinking about the value chain, what I need to think about is two equations. There's a revenue equation and there's a cost equation. The total revenue in the system, the total revenue in the value chain, is determined by how much the end user is willing to pay for the end product. That's all the revenue I've got to divide up. But then I have to cover the costs of various activities. By the way, you'll hear people talk about the value chain as though it were organizations or firms, businesses. I think it's more useful to think about activities. Yes, a distributor is a part of a value chain, but they're part of the value chain because they're activities that they do that are really important. By the way, if they weren't important, why do them? When Jack Welch was CEO at General Electric, he had a a program called Workout. Brought in consultants and have meetings with various personnel in various divisions. And the purpose was to identify all the things that people spent time and money on that added no value to the customer. By the way, in really big organizations, you can spend a lot of time and money on things that have no value to anybody. But they get adopted. Somebody at some point in time said, let's have a staff meeting every Monday morning. 10 years later, we're still having staff meetings every Monday morning. Why? If there's some value that's being created, then sure, let's continue to do that. But if we're meeting just because we've always met, it's always been the way we've been doing it, maybe we ought to reconsider. Part of what has made Walmart successful is they eliminated some organizations from the value chain. They basically said, we can do those things better than any partner. We can do it more efficiently. Get rid of that partner. So we've got a revenue cap here. We've got to divide it up to cover the cost of the various activities among the organizations and people who are performing those activities. By the way, the amount of revenue people get has to be large enough that they are sustainable. So if you have a distributor, they have to make some money so they can stay in business. But there's also a cost equation. Remember I said individual customers cost us. And I'll have more to say about cost as we go along as well. But all of those activities in the value chain have a cost associated with it. And so we have to figure out how we're going to cover those costs. And again, I can't have one partner in the value chain getting no revenue but covering all the costs. This doesn't work. On the other hand, the revenue and costs don't have to be divided up proportionately. I would like to be in the business that gets the largest share of revenue and the smallest share of costs. Intel. What does Intel do? What do they make? Well, actually, in a sense they make computers, but they only make a part of the computer. They make the chip. They make they make the brains of the computer. But they don't actually make computers. They don't engage in assembly. They partner with somebody to assemble all that stuff. I mean, now we're talking about sheet metal and stuff. They're not in the retail business. You'll go to an Intel shop to buy a computer. And the reason for this is that the really high margin part of the business, personal computer business specifically, is that chip, that integrated circuit, the brains of the computer. Things like assembly, things like retailing, those are really low margin. So what Intel has effectively done is get a disproportionate share of the revenue and push a disproportionate share of the cost off to their partners. Now, there are limits to how much of this you can do, because you have to have partners, they have to survive. But one of the challenges in dealing with a business is actually figuring out how to organize and manage these value chains. Because in a lot of cases, we don't own our partners. We can't tell them what to do. Firms that do business with Walmart don't tell Walmart what to do. Walmart usually tells them what to do. So we need to think about what are the set of activities we need to get done. which ones are we going to do in our business, and which ones will we partner with others to do? How many of you are familiar with Benetton? Fashion company, Benetton? Well, Benetton does two things. They're a fashion company, they make clothing, fashion company. They do no manufacturing. They do no distribution. They partner. So they have manufacturers scattered around the globe, mostly in China, but a number of other places. They have distributors that have the Benetton name on the retail outlet, but they don't own those. So what does Benetton do? It does two things. It designs and it brands. By the way, those are the two high margin parts of the fashion business. Manufacturing is a high cost, low margin business. Distribution is a high cost, low margin business. So Benetton has come up with a really interesting business model where they focus on the two high margin activities, design and branding. So this is talking now about four elements of the value of a business model. Every business model has to have these elements. And as you begin to think about a business, you really need to begin to think about it in these terms. I talk with a lot of would-be business owners, and I ask what many think are silly questions, but it's like, have you thought about who your suppliers can be? Well, no. You think that's important? Well, yeah. You're going to go to the bank and borrow money, they may like to know that. But ultimately, what the business model does is help us answer two important strategic questions. The first is, which end users are we going to serve? Who out there can we serve that will be profitable, given what we can charge, what revenue we can generate, given what the costs may be? And secondly, where are we going to play in the value chain? Which activities is our business going to engage in? And who will be our partners for other things? One of the most critical elements in Dollar Shave Club, what actually turned out to be a supplier, is what does Dollar Shave Club deliver? What was their value proposition? A good shave. What produces a good shave? The razor, the blade. Actually, it turns out there are only about 4 suppliers of razors in the world. They're blades. And so Dollar Shave Club had to figure out who they were going to work with and who would do business with them. Very critical. Because if they didn't deliver a really good shave, they're out of business. So, who are we going to serve, and how are we going to divide up the activities? There are all kinds of business models. The good news is there are huge numbers of business models, and people have actually cataloged them. So you can actually go and look at business models, although people are coming up with new ones all the time. There are affinity clubs. Anybody know what an affinity credit card is? Any of you have a credit card that has something like LMU on it? Or Los Angeles Rams? Well, those types of cards are called affinity cards. And basically, they are offered as a way of letting people identify with a particular organization through the use of their credit card. In fact, universities like LMU often raise money this way because they will get a small fraction of the purchase price as a way of being compensated for the use of their brand. Affinity simply means you're creating an association. And MBNA, a well-known credit card provider, specializes in affinity credit cards. And so they sell credit cards through various organizations. So if you're a member of the American Association of Retired Persons, you can get an affinity card. If you're a member, if you're a member of a particular university's alumni association, you can get their card. Not everybody cares to have an affinity credit card, but there are people out there who do. Brokers, what do brokers do? What does a real estate broker do? All they do is they find buyers and sellers and match them. I mean, that's their activity. And there are brokers in all kinds of businesses. We think about real estate brokers, but there are all kinds of brokers. And their value is that they are able to identify people to match. It's a business, and then they get paid for that. They get paid a commission for that. All kinds of bundling can be a business model. You go to McDonald's and buy a value meal. Yeah, you could buy each one of those elements separately, but they'll offer you a price discount if you buy the whole meal. So that's a business model. I won't take you through all of these, but there's razors and blades. We sell the razor at relatively modest cost. Sometimes even give it away and then make our money with blades. The Hewlett-Packard model for ink is a razor blade model because they're selling the printer itself at a low cost and then charging huge margins on the ink. Or you could have a reverse model. You basically sell a relatively low cost product and then sell add-ons. In fact, a lot of apps, the business model is they give you the app, but then there are all kinds of in-app purchases. Same is true with games. You can get through the first 5 stages of the game for free, but then if you want to go beyond that, they start charging you. We talked a bit about subscription, and the list goes on and on. I mean, there are books that literally are hundreds of pages long that just list business models. So there are really two conditions. There are really two conditions necessary, or two characteristics necessary for a really good business model. The first is a really compelling story. Being able to tell the story. And I'm going to ask you to do this in your presentation at the end of the class in describing your bikes. Basically, how does the business work? Just tell me, who are the customers? Why are they buying? How are you making money? How are you pricing? What are the underlying assumptions that are necessary? And then once you've told the story, you can put numbers to it. You really can't put numbers to anything until you actually know the story. Until you tell me how you're going to price, you have no way of putting any revenue figures in place. So the question is then, do the numbers work? So really compelling business models tell a really good story and they show that the numbers work, at least under some assumptions. There are two really useful tools that I'll just mention to you. There's the value proposition canvas and the business model canvas. You can find these online. If ever you're interested in creating a value proposition or creating a business model, these are simply templates that you might find useful. Here's a value proposition canvas. It talks about products and services and what are the gain creators, what are the pain relievers. By pain relievers, we mean what does it take out that people don't like? This is the business canvas, business model canvas, and you've got customer segments here, relationships with customers, you've got distribution here, you've got the key resources, partners, key activities. Right in the middle is the value proposition, and then at the bottom, translate that into cost and revenue. I just mentioned these because they're really useful tools. Some of you may want to go into business and you might find these helpful. The great news is that when we start a business, we have the ultimate consultant available to us. And the ultimate consultant is the customer. We can actually go out and talk to people. And by the way, you don't have to spend enormous amounts of money to get information from customers. Firms do, and it's useful if you have a lot of money to go spend on market research. But if you're a small business person or just thinking about a business, you can go find customers and talk to them. We had a creative director at Needham Harper and Steers Advertising when I was there, who would simply go out and find people in stores and talk to them. So that's where I get my best ideas. Just go find people. They're in the store buying something. Why are you buying that? Why that one rather than that one? What do you like about that? Got any problems with that? And suddenly you got a host of ideas from the perspective of the customer. So make use of the customer. So then we stop working. Put it this way. I will close with simply a discussion of alternative business models. There are common models out there. If you're selling a product at a large margin, an apple, for example, you're getting big margins. And you're getting that because it's creative, it's stylish, and people will pay you a lot for that. And so if you look at the profit they make divided by the sales price, that gives you margin. There are a lot of companies where margin is really critical. But there are other businesses where they don't make much in the way of margins. They may make some margin, but they don't make very much. Walmart, my friends at Walmart complain, we only make 1% on every sale, on average. That's true. And they want me to feel sorry for them. You might until you learn that they do that 38 times a year. So if I can make 1% 38 times a year, that's a good business. But that's what we call a turns business, or you'll sometimes referred to as a velocity business. You're not selling at very high margins, but you're selling a lot of stuff. This is a typical distribution model. Retailers often use this model. And finally, there's what we call leverage. And you've heard about financial leverage. Here I mean marketing leverage. It's a little bit different from financial leverage. How does Walt Disney Company, the Disney Company, make its money? Yeah.
Say the movies or the theme park.
Well, yeah, but there's something more fundamental than that. Yeah.
Merchandise?
Well, that's a part of it, yeah.
Like franchising the merchandise,
That's a part of it.
like licensing.
Their brand?
With brands, but what specifically are the brands?
Their animal characters?
They're characters. The core business of Disney is the character. And every time they have a new character, guess what? Franchising opportunities, merchandising opportunities, a new ride at the amusement park, opportunities to work to license the product for fast food promotions, to license the product for toys. And what they're doing is that they are taking an asset that somebody else owns. They don't make toys. They go to a toy manufacturer, and the toy manufacturer manufactures the product. But they own the character. And so they get a fee for the use of the character, but they don't have to pay for the use of the manufacturing assets. That's what we call a leverage model. I can use somebody else's assets to make money. Powerful, powerful model. By the way, if I put these together, margins, turns, and leverage, and cross out the common terms, I get return on equity. And if you've been in an accounting class, you've probably seen these ratios.